Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today is a Patreon request from McCentry. I'm talking about the 2015 album from Jam2go, Lithodelphis. You know, one nice thing about Patreon requests is that they can take me into territory that I don't really get the chance to explore in any other typical format. And I gotta say, it's been a long time since I've looked at a vaporwave project. Vaporwave is one of those genres that, it had its big moment in the sun, but that moment is well behind us now. You'll very rarely see anyone attempt something in this genre nowadays unless you count, the modern-day TikTok crowd who recently discovered the concept of slowed plus reverb and thought they invented it. To be fair, it's not like the vaporwave crowd themselves were any better about that. The whole future funk scene in vaporwave's heyday was technically just people from my generation making super simplistic 2000s French house. But whatever, that's a whole different conversation. Vaporwave was absolutely a gimmicky genre that tended to be more concerned with the service level presentation than the underlying substance, the kind of thing that looked like a weird short-lived fad when it first started. But it lasted quite a long time because there was a surprising amount of variety and creativity within that scene, and it went surprisingly deep with all sorts of different subcultures and sub-scenes. Case in point, here's an artist who apparently jumped on the scene during its peak of relevance and delivered a specific style of it that I'm not sure if I've come across before. Jam2go is the primary alias for the Atlanta-based producer James Hodge. These days his music has apparently taken a bit more of a backseat in place of game programming, but he has put out a number of albums over the past couple of years, and he got to start making vaporwave adjacent material. This project here is his debut effort in 2015, notable for combining vaporwave with French house and labeling it as Vapor House. Now on paper that sounds like he's just making future funk, but that's not it. That label does seem more accurate to what you're actually getting with this project than you might think. Compared to regular future funk, which was pretty much just chasing after the success of Daft Punk's Discovery, making plunderphonic party music, this project is directly trying to capture that specific kind of, melancholic 80s nostalgia atmosphere that regular vaporwave was trying to capture as well. It feels like more standard vaporwave with occasional French house beats and influences, hence Vapor House. That does make sense. Now, I seriously doubt Jam2go was the first one to this sound by any metric, especially by 2015. This seemed like a fairly obvious blend to be chasing after. And it's also not like he saw a lot of success through making it. I mean, this album only has about the same amount of people who purchased it on Bandcamp as any random artist who gets highlighted in the Bandcamp daily blogs. I have several hundred more Twitter followers than this guy does as well. He's a step above your typical no-name obscure Bandcamp artist in that he does have an established audience, but he's not exactly on the level of a Blank Banshee or a Macross 8299 or a 2814. And if my format existed in the current way it does now, back in 2015, this album absolutely would have just been relegated to a Some Stuff I Miss segment. But it's been requested for a proper video breaking it down, so with all that background, how much did I end up getting into Lithodelphis? Well, it was pretty good. Nothing especially mind-blowing in the greater scheme of the genre, not a project I see myself coming back to a lot in the future, but certainly serviceable for what it is. I have probably listened to this album 8 times at this point, since I frequently had it on in the background while working on other things. In that way, it's already served me quite well, and it's very marginally grown on me in that time. And I'll also have to give it credit for being solidly well-produced and mastered. That's definitely not something you were guaranteed to get out of vaporwave projects from this era. But if this hadn't been specifically requested for me to make a video on it, I'm not sure if it's the kind of thing that would have stuck out enough for me to, want to go out of my way to highlight it myself. I mean, from the outset, this project doesn't exactly get off to the strongest of starts. After a pleasant enough ambient keyboard intro, we open up with the title track, which, I was kind of ambivalent on. It felt kind of generic, with its glittering synths and basic 80s beats following a standard 4 chords of pop progression. Wasn't the kind of thing that really felt like it was really selling me on the vibe of the album as a whole. Granted, I suppose that track did very mildly grow on me with each repeat listen. I think it's fine. And it's probably my least favorite out of the 10 cuts on display here. The album does pick up a bit more with following track 50 Rainbow Dolphin. This is where the vaporwave vibes really start to kick in with all this thick soundscapey ambience and evocative loops of pan flutes that sound particularly nice. And the following cut, Förlorat, is where the French house influences start to kick in. At first starting with this slower hip-hop beat combined with a few spacious keyboard pad samples, and then building into these thicker new disco beats and sidechaining all the samples. Also bringing in some incomprehensible vocals and pianos in its sample chop. Again, very nice, very pleasant. We do hit an odd note with the centerpiece of sorts in the 7-minute vool, going for a much more traditional vaporwave and ambient formula that is just as pleasant and keeps up the vibe in theory, with more thick ambient pads that match those on the previous track, with a few glittering keyboard licks and some super pitched down sample periodically murmuring in the background. Though, I might like this track more if not for the fact that, like, all the samples are oddly panned slightly to the right here for whatever reason. The mix sounds markedly fuller in one ear than it does in the other, and that leads to a feeling of being, like, subtly off balance as if my headphones were going on the blink. It's the only track here to do anything like that, and I'm not sure why that particular choice was made. Anyway, after another quick ambient interlude and Page Not Found, we get Fall Apart, which is one track you're definitely not going to miss. It's built around a fairly untouched, like, Blue-Eyed Soul sample of a singer saying, "Seems I was born for the part." I guess Jam2go is trying to make a little bit of like a J Dilla type move, since if you isolate For the Part, it sounds like he's saying Fall Apart, like the title. Though he never actually isolates that clip on its own, he just kind of loops it and then chops it up into much smaller pieces and then layers them on top of each other for like a subtle hip-hop instrumental. It's another nice little moment there. Next there's O Gel Misto, which is another odd cut that I like parts of, but it does take a while to really get going. This one's built around a sample of what sounds like some kind of Japanese pop song or a pitched up soul sample for all I know. But the track starts out by stretching out the sample to a kind of ridiculous extent, taking lots of small stutters of it to create that time stretch effect, kind of like what Daft Punk did with the live version of Face to Face on Alive 2007. Once the groove actually kicks into gear, it's a fun little stomper, but I don't know if that track's really one of my big favorites here. It can feel a little underweight in comparison with other cuts here and is a bit too off-kilter to be easily danceable. Thankfully, the album does have a particularly strong finish. Seulement, true to its French title, goes all in on the French house influence with all these chopped up and reversed J-pop song samples that keep stuttering and creating their own odd hooks out of the fragments. The kind that you might hear out of like Lamb's Anger era Mr. Waza or something, albeit not nearly as punchy or abrasive. And the album probably closes with its single strongest moment, Leave Dud. At first starting in standard vaporwave territory with a pitched down soul sample musing on a lost love and living and dying, pitching it up later as well. It's one of the better hooks in the bunch for sure, but what really lets this track go the extra mile are these out of nowhere change-ups into like full-on drum and bass bangers, just hitting you with all these fast-paced banging breakbeats and totally kicking the track into high gear to a level that maybe you wouldn't be ready for from the brooding manner in which the track began. But yeah, that's everything on Lithodelphis. The album's Name Your Price on Bandcamp also comes with a bonus track in an alternate drum machine version of Seulement, which is not nearly as good as the original. The experience of the core album is all around nice for what the genre has to offer. Granted, it's not really the kind of thing that, like, you know, merits a lot of deeper analysis. If you were there to find it back in 2015, it was probably a particularly neat hidden gem, and I definitely had fun with it for my listens leading up to this video, but my enjoyment of it didn't exactly go that far beyond the surface level of it being, you know, competently made for the particular genres it operates in. This doesn't feel like anything all that revolutionary or mind-blowing or even especially striking in the greater context of these genres. Once again, this at best would typically be the kind of project that if it came out now, I'd at best stick it in like a Some Stuff I Missed as, well, you know, one of the random Bandcamp finds that I typically pull up to fill out one of those roundups. But it wouldn't really stick with me beyond that. Though, at the same time, I suppose the fact that I listen to this a lot more than I typically would for Some Stuff I Miss segment almost certainly worked to its benefit, since a lot of these hooks are more likely to stick with me. It just, you know, none of my repeat listens exactly revealed new things to me about the album that I couldn't have derived from my first listen. Not that this genre is exactly known for making especially deep listens to begin with, so I don't know. If all I've said about it intrigues you, give it a shot. I mean, I think at the end of the day, even if I don't think this is absolutely essential listening by any stretch, it was a fun enough listen where I'm feeling a strong, solid 7 out of 10. It's good. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.